Welcome, night wanderers, to Mr. Sleepy Hollow Explorations, where sleep awaits in the shadows. Are you ready to drift off into a world of calm? I'm Mr. Sleepy Hollow, your guide through these cozy and spooky nights, here to help quiet the mind and bring you a little extra peace. As someone who battles with sleep, I know how helpful these gentle escapes can be, so I'm thrilled to share this with you with a few hauntingly soothing twists. This video will softly fade into darkness in just 5 minutes, lulling you closer to rest. And if you'd like, follow along with the subtitles our spectral guide will lead you through. Before you close your eyes, let me know where are you tuning in from tonight? Share your corner of the world in the comments. And if this video adds a bit more calm to your night, please consider subscribed, leaving a like, or sharing your thoughts below. Wishing you a night full of sweet dreams, cookie serenity, and wishing you a scary tale ending this Halloween. Black Magic. Mad Henry was a hermit who lived alone in a decrepit mansion at the edge of town. Rumors were rife about the wild-eyed man. Some folks said that he was a magician who called upon the powers of darkness to wreak havoc upon his neighbors. Others called him a mad doctor who could restore life to foul corpses from the local cemetery. No respectable citizen in town had anything to do with Mad Henry. Then one year a new family moved to town with a lovely daughter, Rachel, who caught Mad Henry's eye. He showered the maiden with gifts, goblets of pure gold, necklaces of pearl, and a pot of daisies that never dropped a single petal. Despite the gifts, Rachel fell in love with another, Jeffrey, a handsome young man just home from university. A week after meeting they eloped, leaving behind a stunned Mad Henry. When Rachel and Jeffrey returned from the elopement, they threw a big ball and invited everyone in town. While Rachel was waltzing with her father, she heard a clap of thunder. Lightning flashed again and again. Suddenly, the double doors blew open and a breeze whirled in, bringing with it the smell of dead, decaying things. Mad Henry loomed in the doorway, pupils gleaming red with anger. He was followed by the grotesque figures of the dead, who came marching 2 by 2 into the room. Their eye sockets glowed with blue fire as they surrounded the room. 2 of the corpses captured Jeffrey and threw him down at the feet of their lord. Red eyes gleaming, Mad Henry drew a silver blade knife and casually cut the bridegroom's throat from ear to ear. Rachel screamed and ran forward, pushing through the foul, stinking corpses of the dead, and flung herself upon her dying husband. "Kill us both," she cried desperately. But Mad Henry plucked the lass out of the pool of blood surrounding her dead husband and carried her out into the thundering night. Behind him, the army of the dead turned from the grisly scene and followed their master. The sounds of thunder and lightning faded away as the alchemist and his dead companions disappeared into the dark night. Jeffrey's father and Rachel's father gathered a small mob and followed the evil hermit, intent upon saving Rachel. When they searched Mad Henry's house, they found it completely empty save for a light, which shone from a series of mysterious globes that bobbed near the ceiling of each room. Mad Henry had vanished. Search parties scoured the countryside for days but turned up nothing. Jeffrey was buried in the local cemetery, and the dance hall was torn down. No one in town spoke about what had happened, and no one dared imagine what had become of poor Rachel. A year to the day after the ball, a timid knock sounded upon the door of Rachel's parents' home. When her father opened it, he saw the gaunt, gray figure on the stoop. Her eyes were dull with exhaustion and pain. It was Rachel. Her tongue had been cut out so she couldn't speak. But when she produced a knife from her tattered garments, the knife with the silver blade that they had last seen in the hands of Mad Henry, the gleam of satisfaction in Rachel's eyes told them that the streaks of blood that coated the knife were those of Mad Henry. That night, Rachel died in her sleep with a peaceful smile upon her ravaged face. The disappearance of Jennifer Moore. Spanish Creek, Texas is shrouded in paranormal lore, as thick as a blanket in the dead of winter. What place wouldn't be, though, where a colony of witches established themselves in the 1700s? Jen and I weren't interested in the witches, though, or even the crazed cult that supposedly wreaked havoc in our hometown during the 1980s. We were interested in ghosts, and the most locally known ghost in Spanish Creek is that of Delia Dominguez, the Pancake Lady. Jennifer Moore and I had been friends since 8th grade. She was a gorgeous brunette with an oval face, brown eyes, and a curvy, slender frame. I'm a chunky strawberry blonde guy with green eyes, even more so back in 2005 when the stuff I'm about to relate happened. My name is Tyler Jameson, and I'm willing to bet that some of you reading this have heard of me. Lots of folks think I killed Jen on this particular night. I promise, though, I did not. The tragic story of Delia Dominguez is probably one of the strangest stories in Spanish Creek's past. Unlike most spook tales, though, the origins of her ghost are fully factual and still fairly recent. You can read it all in the microfilmed copies of the Spanish Creek Ledger in the county library, September 9 to 12, 1968. To sum it all up, Delia was a cafeteria lady at Robertson Elementary School. On the morning of September 9, 1968, a fire started in the basement-level lunchroom of the building. It quickly climbed up to the top floor and eventually destroyed the whole rear portion of the school. Fortunately, none of the staff or students were hurt, except Delia Dominguez. Prior to the blaze, Delia was a beautiful young 23-year-old woman. She was greatly admired by all the guys in Spanish Creek, for obvious reasons when you see a picture of her from the time, but lived an isolated life in a rental house on the side of the old witch colony. Her co-workers, even in 2005 when Jen and I interviewed some of them, never had a bad thing to say about Delia other than she was sometimes a bit quiet and distant. The fire left her body mangled. Somehow, Jen was able to get the actual photographs of the scene from the county sheriff's office. Even today, I don't like remembering those images. Delia's flesh had bubbled and melted, oozed down her frame, and pooled in grimy black splotches on the floor around her. That beautiful, attractive 23-year-old woman was gone forever, and according to local lore, replaced by her wrathfully vengeful ghost. Robertson Elementary School was never rebuilt. The school district decided to build a new campus inside the town limits itself, and the cafeteria was even christened as the Delia Dominguez Memorial Kitchen. This new establishment served Spanish Creek until 1998 when it too was condemned due to asbestos concerns. But Robertson Elementary was never demolished, and still somehow stands today as if its burned corridors are held up by pure magic. During high school in the early 2000s, a paranormal craze was sweeping the country. TV shows featuring ghost hunters were hitting all the top spots on the charts, and Jen was swept up in the fervor. She wanted to conduct and film a ghost hunt of her own, and asked if I would like to be the cameraman for it. Normally, if it had been anyone else, I would have said no almost immediately. But this was Jen, the girl my heart had longed for since that 8th grade science class. I couldn't turn her down. In Spanish Creek, Jen had a whole plethora of local legends she could have chosen for her project. The Devil Rider of Glenmont Trace, the Yankee sympathizers of Arroyo Rojo, or heck, even the spirits of Witch Road. But nope, she had her mind set on the Pancake Lady of Robertson Elementary School. We started the research process at the end of our freshman year. By mid-September of our sophomore semester, we had collected enough information to write a book on it all. Interviews, newspaper articles, police reports, photographs, the whole 9 yards. Jen knew every detail of the story, down to the exact spot of the basement-level kitchen where Delia Dominguez's body was found. All that was left was the investigation itself, or be allowed by internet trolls to live with in peace. The moon was a bright waxing crescent shape. Not all the way full, but close enough. I picked Jen up at around 8:30, and I will forever remember how hard my heart beat when I saw her coming out of her house. It was uniquely cool that evening in Spanish Creek. A nice autumn wind rustling through the chalk maple tree in her front yard, a plastic jack-o'-lantern glowing on her porch, bright leaves wispily dancing around her body as she stepped towards my truck. In my mind, even now, Jennifer Moore is the true embodiment of the Queen of Autumn. The ruins of Robertson Elementary School are 6 miles west of Spanish Creek, and at the end of a short dirt road officially labeled CR 113. No one in town of course calls it that. Rather, its moniker is Pancake Lane. After the 1968 inferno, the building was slated to be torn down. Some Houston real estate developer bought the property, and seemingly did nothing to it but surround it in simple chain-link fencing. For 37 years, at least in 2005, that fence had been breached in a number of places. Jen and I easily found an opening behind the building that led into the former playground area. Rusty recess equipment creaked loudly in the wind. A badly deteriorating swing swung like some unseen person sat upon its moldy seat. Slithers of October moonlight filtered through passing clouds. Directly in front of us, like a blackened hull of a sunken ship in the darkness of the ocean floor, stood the overgrown remnants of Robertson Elementary School. Its windows looked upon Jen and I like empty mournful eye sockets of a skeleton, nothing left of itself but the dust and bones of a life once lived. Jen was ecstatic. This was the kind of horrifying adventure she had always craved. A true Lara Croft, standing at the threshold of some ancient marvel that beckoned her to come find its secrets and unravel its mysterious treasures. I, on the other hand, just wanted to get the hell away from there. You already know how that went though. In mere seconds, we were already into a corridor of vacant classrooms. Jen wanted me to film everything, just in case there might be something we missed. I've honestly never reviewed these opening moments of our ghost hunt. I remember thinking I saw something out of the corner of my eye in one of the rooms, and taking a step back to shine the light of the camera in it, but didn't see anything. Maybe there was or maybe there wasn't, but I don't think it would have changed Jen's drive to get into the cafeteria. Before I get to the parts of the story where things get crazy, I need to interject something while I have the opportunity. Graffiti. Particularly, rural graffiti. I live in a larger city now, Victoria, Texas, if any of y'all know where that's at, and I see people complaining about amateur murals and tagging all the time. But compared to the images that were on the walls of Robertson Elementary School, the ones I see nowadays are almost equivalent to artistic masterpieces. I don't know why rural graffiti artists are so obsessed with images of the male reproductive organ. Dicks, everywhere you look. Big ones, small ones, hairy ones. Not even a decent drawing of breasts. Just dicks everywhere. I didn't understand it then, and I don't understand it now. When Jen and I got to the top of the stairs that curved downward into the cafeteria, both of us just froze. Originally, Jen planned to relate a number of ghost stories about the Pancake Lady in this segment. I think both of us were so struck by where we were standing though, that the notion to do so slipped entirely out of our minds. We stared into each other's eyes for a few passing moments, lost in a world of bewilderment and choices. Truthfully, I wanted to quit right then and there. I think I related earlier, I'm not a fan of ghosts and ghouls. Give me spiders, snakes, rats. Hell, armed robbers even. Those things don't scare me even half as bad as paranormal entities. In my opinion, when a person dies they either go to heaven, hell, or just a hole in the ground. Things that shouldn't be messed with. I was the polar opposite of Jennifer Moore though. After locking eyes with me for a few minutes, she smiled beautifully, and out of nowhere crashed her lips into mine. When she pulled away, I was so out of my mind that I don't even remember her descending to the second landing of the stairwell. But I followed her immediately. Out of the two of us, Jen was the brave one. She got to the entryway of the cafeteria and stepped boldly inside. I hesitated at the threshold, and she turned her head towards me, and I swear those dark eyes had never shimmered as brightly as they did at that moment. Don't chicken out on me now. Her siren-like voice beckoned, and a seductive smile lured. It's hard for me to accurately describe the stench of that cafeteria. 4 decades of mold, grime, rat feces, and stale air mixed disgustingly with the odor of abandonment. Broken and burned lunch tables were scattered all across the room. Weeds had long covered up the windows outside. Vines that were parasitic, creeping through any openings their living growths could find. Jen was quick to venture further into the pitch darkness of the lunchroom, swinging the beam of her flashlight at every sound that creaked or groaned. I followed closely behind, my mind still whirling from the kiss I had always dreamed of getting. It wasn't hard to find the kitchen area though. Oddly enough, the metal rods of the serving bar were still holding up quite well despite the fire and being abandoned for 37 years. When the beam of her light reflected off the countertops, Jennifer raced into the room like a toddler on Christmas morning. She knew exactly where Delia Dominguez's body had been found, and she was eager to conduct some EVPs, electronic voice phenomenons, at the exact site. Her excitement, truthfully, was a bit disturbing. Whenever you're standing at a site where you know, for a fact, that someone died in a sudden and tragic way, there's this deep unsettling feeling that just creeps into your mind. It takes over your imagination, which inevitably seeps into your nervous system, and suddenly, you're cast off into a wild sea of frightened emotions. When I was a kid, my mom had an uncle and aunt who lived in a real nice house up in Dallas. There was a big pool at their place, surrounded by a wooden fence and a thick hedgerow as well. I never felt unsettled or weird about swimming in their pool until after my mom's uncle died. He was right at the edge of the pool when he had a sudden heart attack. It was fatal, almost immediately. After that, any time my mom and I would go and visit her aunt, I never wanted to go swimming. I had this fear that I was always being watched, and that if I went beneath the surface, I'd look up from under the water and see my mom's uncle standing at the edge, staring down at me with soulless silence and vacant eyes. That's exactly how I felt when Jen and I reached the back corner of the kitchen. Slippery black grime that covered the floor didn't make the situation any better either. To Jen though, this was like finding a cache of pirate treasure in a sand dune somewhere. Wow, this is exactly where it happened. I remember her saying, "Tyler, can you believe that this is the exact spot where one of the most profound legends in our town began? Where one of the most tragic events in our local history occurred?" I can't remember how I replied to those comments. It was something that sounded astonished, but in reality was an attempt to conceal my nerves. I didn't like being there one bit. Jen pulled out her voice recorder and started asking some easy questions into a void of nothingness. I could tell she didn't like wasting time with that technique, and suddenly, she stuffed the recorder in her pocket and stood fully upright. I'm going to attempt to draw her out. Wait, what? I'm going to try and get her to show herself to us. Aren't you curious if she actually looks all deformed and stuff? Hell no, Jen. This isn't what we came here to do. At this point, Jen and I got sort of heated at each other and I lowered the camera. Ones who've seen the video have commented that some sort of weird perspiration starts forming on the video lens at this moment. Like there's a drastic coolness on a window in a hot room. Jen and I debate the subject, back and forth, for about 2 minutes. I can recall that she was really adamant about getting footage of the pancake lady. It finally concludes when she just bluntly tells me that I could leave if I wanted to. Naturally, I wasn't going to do that. Before I lift the camera up again, Jen starts talking to the darkness. "Delia Dominguez, if you are here, make your presence known." In silent defeat, I brought the camera back to my face and trained it on the back corner of the kitchen. Jen and I listened pretty intently for a few moments, flicking our eyes around the room, listening to everything that even remotely makes a sound. Nothing happens. Finally, Jen and I lock eyes intently. I can see the disappointment glistening in her dazzling pupils. "Delia Dominguez, if you are here, make." Before Jen even finishes, a heavy cloud of what looks like mist begins to swirl up from the spot where Delia Dominguez was found. Our breaths exhale in cold, icy gasps. In less time than it took both of us to say, "What the fuck?" The figure of a woman takes shape right in front of us and screams. This part of the video I have looked at very intently. It takes only 3 seconds for that apparition to appear. It's definitely a young woman, with curly dark hair hanging around her face. She's wearing what looks to be a yellow dress, with the corner of a white apron visible just a couple of centimeters above her right knee. Her arms are at her side, flakes of darkened flesh barely hanging onto her charred bones. From her knees upwards, the dress has been badly burnt and parts of it have seemingly fused to her body. Her face, though, that's the part that still gives me nightmares. Globs of melted flesh have dried about her cheeks. Her lips are blackened, blood-stained, and cracked. Her hair is barely hanging onto her darkened skull, and eye sockets devoid of anything but ash and soot are staring directly at Jen. I panicked. We both did. You can hear Jennifer trying to get away as much as you can hear me. At least, for a couple of seconds. I take off through the lunchroom, scrambling over debris and remnants of chairs and tables like a convict trying to escape a prison. When I get to the entryway of the lunchroom, I charge straight up both sets of stairs before stopping at the top floor landing. I remember it hitting me then, that Jen wasn't behind me. I called out her name. There was nothing. Silence, as loud as thunder. I wait for a couple of minutes, and I'm not going to lie, I thought very strongly about leaving. Jennifer had called this down upon herself, right? I warned her not to. My conscience was clear. But I couldn't. What if she had just tripped and fell unconscious down there? Was I just going to leave her on that disgusting floor for the rats and the pancake lady to consume? Maybe she just sprung those beautiful slender ankles of hers and fell behind. All of these possibilities were storming through my mind as I descended back to the bottom floor landing of the staircase. When I got to the threshold of the cafeteria, I saw the cone of Jennifer's flashlight beaming brightly against the wall with the windows above it. A shadow moved slowly across it. I wasn't thinking clearly at this point. My mind was an earthquake of mega magnitude, causing every logical thought to crumble. Taking a deep breath, I flung myself around the corner of the doorway, my camera instantly trained towards the bottom tip of that flashlight beam. Jen. I hollered instinctively. At the entry of the kitchen, with her back towards me, stood the charred figure of Delia Dominguez. She stood silently over a darkened shape on the ground before her, not moving, not breathing even it seemed. The light of the camera was trained perfectly on the pancake lady. After a second, her head fell backwards, and she stared at me with those deep and empty eye sockets. As I turned to run back up the stairs, a piercing wail echoed through the darkened corridors of Robertson Elementary School. That was it. That was the last time I ever set foot on that property. Jennifer's parents filed a missing persons claim on her. Naturally, I was the prime suspect for over 3 years. Investigators from the local police, the FBI, and even the freaking Texas Rangers prodded me to confess to the notion that I had murdered Jen and did something with her remains. I never did. All of those detectives watched the video from that night. None of them could reasonably explain what they saw, but all of them finally concluded that there was no way I could have done anything malicious to Jennifer Moore in the brief moments that her and I are running away from the kitchen. I was cleared of all charges in 2010, and at the request of Jennifer's family, I created a YouTube memorial channel in her memory and uploaded the video from that night. It's gotten millions of views in the last decade, and continues to draw enough subscribers that Jennifer's parents have established a yearly scholarship in her honor at Spanish Creek High School. Honestly, I think Jen would be proud that her community remembers her so fondly. I've been called every demeanor in existence. At least twice a week, I still get long drawn-out accusations from nobody internet trolls accusing me of murder. I've learned to ignore most of the things people say about me. I was cleared of all suspicion years ago, so if you're one of the trolls reading this, go fuck yourself. I don't know what happened to Jennifer Moore on that October night back in 2005. Investigators went into the cafeteria immediately after Jen's parents filed the missing persons report. I was being detained already, but from what I've heard, they found her flashlight and nothing more. However, every night since and in all of my dreams, whether good or bad, I can always hear Jen's voice. She's crying out to me from somewhere in the background. In the dreams, when I turn to look for her, I'm instantly cast back into that dark and odorous stairwell of Robertson Elementary School. I'm on the bottom landing, 8 simple steps up from the gaping blackness of the cafeteria doorway. Jen is standing just on the other side of the threshold, her beautiful eyes gleaming, desperately, up at me. Her arms reaching wildly for me, begging me to take hold of her hands and pull her into my embrace. When I get close to her though, from the darkness behind her, short burned skeletal fingers grab Jen by the shoulders and yank her back into that eternal blackness, screaming. In the silence that follows, the half-burned face of the pancake lady appears motionlessly at the threshold, staring up at me with those sickening vacant sockets. Silently, she molds back into darkness, and I wake up sweating and in terror. In my opinion, I think Jen is trapped in some kind of paranormal cage. She's still down there in that disgusting cafeteria, only not physically. Held captive by the wrathful spirit of her obsession, the pancake lady. I've often wondered what would happen if I could get to her before she's pulled back into that prison of darkness and macabre. Would she emerge unscathed? Would we live happily ever after? Maybe tonight. I'll try. Don't turn on the light. She commandeered the room in the basement of her dorm as soon as she realized she would have to pull an all-nighter in order to prepare for tomorrow's final exam. Her roommate, Jenna, liked to get to bed early, so she packed up everything she thought she would need and went downstairs to study. And study. And study some more. It was 2 o'clock when she realized that she'd left one of the textbooks upstairs on her bed. With a dramatic sigh, she rose and climbed the stairs slowly to her 3rd-floor dorm room. The lights were dim in the long hallway, and the old boards creaked under her weary tread. She reached her room and turned the handle as softly as she could, pushing the door open just enough to slip inside, so that the hall lights wouldn't wake her roommate. The room was filled with a strange, metallic smell. She frowned a bit, her arms breaking out into chills. There was a strange feeling of malice in the room, as if a malevolent gaze were fixed upon her. It was a mind trick. The all-nighter was catching up with her. She could hear Jenna breathing on the far side of the room, a heavy sound, almost as if she had been running. Jenna must have picked up a cold during the last tense week before finals. She crept along the wall until she reached her bed, groping among the covers for the stray history textbook. In the silence, she could hear a steady drip, drip, drip sound. She sighed silently. Facilities would have to come to fix the sink in the bathroom, again. Her fingers closed on the textbook. She picked it up softly and withdrew from the room as silently as she could. Relieved to be out of the room, she hurried back downstairs, collapsed into an overstuffed chair and studied until 6 o'clock. She finally decided that enough was enough. If she slipped upstairs now, she could get a couple hours sleep before her 9 o'clock exam. The first of the sun's rays were beaming through the windows as she slowly slid the door open, hoping not to awaken Jenna. Her nose was met by an earthy, metallic smell a second before her eyes registered the scene in her dorm room. Jenna was spread-eagled on top of her bed against the far wall, her throat cut from ear to ear and her nightdress stained with blood. 2 drops of blood fell from the saturated blanket with a drip-drip noise that sounded like a leaky faucet. Scream after scream poured from her mouth, but she couldn't stop herself any more than she could cease wringing her hands. All along the hallway, doors slammed and footsteps came running down the passage. Within moments other students had gathered in her doorway, and one of her friends gripped her arm with a shaking hand and pointed a trembling finger toward the wall. Her eyes widened in shock at what she saw. Then she fainted into her friend's arms. On the wall above her bed, written in her roommate's blood, were the words, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?" Bloody Mary. She lived deep in the forest in a tiny cottage and sold herbal remedies for a living. Folks living in the town nearby called her Bloody Mary and said she was a witch. None dared cross the old crone for fear that their cows would go dry, their food stores rot away before winter, their children take sick of fever, or any number of terrible things that an angry witch could do to her neighbors. Then the little girls in the village began to disappear, one by one. No one could find out where they had gone. Grief-stricken families searched the woods, the local buildings, and all the houses and barns, but there was no sign of the missing girls. A few brave souls even went to Bloody Mary's home in the woods to see if the witch had taken the girls, but she denied any knowledge of the disappearances. Still, it was noted that her haggard appearance had changed. She looked younger, more attractive. The neighbors were suspicious, but they could find no proof that the witch had taken their young ones. Then came the night when the daughter of the miller rose from her bed and walked outside, following an enchanted sound no one else could hear. The miller's wife had a toothache and was sitting up in the kitchen treating the tooth with an herbal remedy when her daughter left the house. She screamed for her husband and followed the girl out of the door. The miller came running in his nightshirt. Together, they tried to restrain the girl, but she kept breaking away from them and heading out of town. The desperate cries of the miller and his wife woke the neighbors. They came to assist the frantic couple. Suddenly, a sharp-eyed farmer gave a shout and pointed towards a strange light at the edge of the woods. A few townsmen followed him out into the field and saw Bloody Mary standing beside a large oak tree, holding a magic wand that was pointed towards the miller's house. She was glowing with an unearthly light as she set her evil spell upon the miller's daughter. The townsmen grabbed their guns and their pitchforks and ran toward the witch. When she heard the commotion, Bloody Mary broke off her spell and fled back into the woods. The far-sighted farmer had loaded his gun with silver bullets in case the witch ever came after his daughter. Now he took aim and shot at her. The bullet hit Bloody Mary in the hip and she fell to the ground. The angry townsmen leapt upon her and carried her back into the field, where they built a huge bonfire and burned her at the stake. As she burned, Bloody Mary screamed a curse at the villagers. If anyone mentioned her name aloud before a mirror, she would send her spirit to revenge herself upon them for her terrible death. When she was dead, the villagers went to the house in the wood and found the unmarked graves of the little girls the evil witch had murdered. She had used their blood to make her young again. From that day to this, anyone foolish enough to chant Bloody Mary's name 3 times before a darkened mirror will summon the vengeful spirit of the witch. It is said that she will tear their bodies to pieces and rip their souls from their mutilated bodies. The souls of these unfortunate ones will burn in torment as Bloody Mary once was burned, and they will be trapped forever in the mirror. Axe Murder Hollow. Susan and Ned were driving through a wooded empty section of highway. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, the sky went dark in the torrential downpour. "We'd better stop," said Susan. Ned nodded his head in agreement. He stepped on the brake, and suddenly the car started to slide on the slick pavement. They plunged off the road and slid to a halt at the bottom of an incline. Pale and shaking, Ned quickly turned to check if Susan was all right. When she nodded, Ned relaxed and looked through the rain-soaked windows. "I'm going to see how bad it is," he told Susan, and went out into the storm. She saw his blurry figure in the headlight, walking around the front of the car. A moment later, he jumped in beside her, soaking wet. "The car's not badly damaged, but we're wheel-deep in mud," he said. "I'm going to have to go for help." Susan swallowed nervously. There would be no quick rescue here. He told her to turn off the headlights and lock the doors until he returned. Axe Murder Hollow. Although Ned hadn't said the name aloud, they both knew what he had been thinking when he told her to lock the car. This was the place where a man had once taken an axe and hacked his wife to death in a jealous rage over an alleged affair. Supposedly, the axe-wielding spirit of the husband continued to haunt this section of the road. Outside the car, Susan heard a shriek, a loud thump, and a strange gurgling noise. But she couldn't see anything in the darkness. Frightened, she shrank down into her seat. She sat in silence for a while, and then she noticed another sound. Bump. 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 It was a soft sound, like something being blown by the wind. Suddenly, the car was illuminated by a bright light. An official-sounding voice told her to get out of the car. Ned must have found a police officer. Susan unlocked the door and stepped out of the car. As her eyes adjusted to the bright light, she saw it. Hanging by his feet from the tree next to the car was the dead body of Ned. His bloody throat had been cut so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. The wind swung his corpse back and forth so that it thumped against the tree. Bump. 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 Susan screamed and ran toward the voice and the light. As she drew close, she realized the light was not coming from a flashlight. Standing there was the glowing figure of a man with a smile on his face and a large, solid, and definitely real axe in his hands. She backed away from the glowing figure until she bumped into the car. Playing around when my back was turned, the ghost whispered, stroking the sharp blade of the axe with his fingers. "You've been very naughty." The last thing she saw was the glint of the axe blade in the eerie, incandescent light. Lady of the Hollow. When I was in my early teens, my dad would drag us to Kentucky every chance he got. 10 hours each way it seemed to mean most of our trip was driving. Finally we would arrive at Aunt Lainey's home. God, I loved her. She had 9 kids. My cousin Ronnie decided that he would tell us about an urban legend called the Devil Lady of Trace Licking Hollow, or Holler as he liked to pronounce it. Ronnie shared with us the following. Up on the outer ridge of this hollow way above the tree line lived a bitter old woman who hated everyone and everything. She was so full of hate that she started doing things to her neighbors. She took pets. When she would pass a neighbor on the road as they were walking beside the road, she would try to take a swipe at them. As this woman got older, she started looking into people's windows, scaring everyone, but she would always disappear by the time any of the family would come out of their house. Then one family had had enough. The father grabbed his hunting rifle and made the hike up to the ridge where the old lady lived. When he entered her property, something was not right. It was too quiet. Then he saw her laying out in the middle of her small garden, dead. Dead for a very long time. How could she be still terrorizing the whole hillside? He also told me to stay away from the windows in the deepest part of night. I said okay, thinking this was just a ploy to get me to go to sleep and not get out of bed. You see, I'm a night owl. My mother says I have been that way since I was in her womb. So I walk upstairs and get into bed, and I cannot go to sleep. I start reading a book that I brought. The last chimes I remember were 3. I turn over and look towards the window, and I freeze. There in the second floor bedroom window was this hideous face I have ever seen. Matted long hair, skin so thin that some was there and some just wasn't. Red eyes, yellow teeth. On the hag's head were horns. I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. I threw the blankets over my head and just kept praying the old hag would go away. The next morning I came down for breakfast and my aunt looked at me and said, "How did you sleep?" I said okay, I guess, and when my aunt left the room, my cousin Ronnie looks at me and says, "Buffy, she always knows what's going on in her holler." Balloon Boy. 3 middle school boys decided to toilet paper an old woman's house. Rumored to be a witch, the woman lived on the outskirts of the small town, and no one ever saw her. Her yard was overgrown, and the house was in a state of disrepair. They waited until it was late at night to sneak out of their houses and met at the edge of town, where they walked to the witch's house. It was dark and cold. The boys couldn't see any light or warmth inside or outside the house. The only thing resembling Halloween was an orange helium-filled balloon tied to the front door. With muffled chuckles, the boys went to work tossing rolls of toilet paper up into the trees, overgrown shrubbery, and onto the roof of the house. They were nearly finished when a black cat mewed by the front door. Startled, the kids stopped like frozen statues. A puff of black smoke emerged from the house. Two of the boys sprinted across the yard, but the third one tripped and fell in front of the smoke and was quickly engulfed. Screaming and crying, he found himself lifted from the ground and being drawn toward the front door. He panicked and cried out for his friends, but they were long gone. He sobbed for his mommy when he found himself inside the orange balloon. Struggling against the mylar prison, he pounded his fists against the elastic walls. "Happy Halloween, my mischievous imp," said the crackling voice as the cat shape shifted into the witch. She reached up and untied the balloon. She stood laughing as the screaming boy drifted up higher and higher over the sleeping town, never to be seen again. The story of the balloon boy spread through the town, but it was considered an urban legend created to explain the mysterious disappearance of the unfortunate missing boy. The face on the tray. Gloria and her friends Sarah and Megan enjoyed riding their horses through the woods next to the riding stable. Many of the old-timers at the stable warned them not to pass Blackwoods at night on horseback. The haunted woods often spooked the horses as well as the riders. One particularly beautiful afternoon close to Halloween, the girls rode out farther than they intended. Crisp leaves crunched under the horses' hooves, and the girls spent more time than usual exploring an unused trail. The sunset faded, and they suddenly realized they had to pass Blackwoods in pitch darkness. The horses knew the path and picked their way carefully through the woodland trail. They came to a fork in the trail. If they took the shortcut, they would go past Blackwoods toward the stables. The horses balked and refused to turn left onto the shortcut. "Let's dismount and walk them the last little bit. We're almost home," Gloria said. "You go." Sarah shivered. "I want to take the long way home and ride to the road. We're going to get in trouble if we walk the horses on the road at night. It's too dangerous. Besides, we're almost at the stables. We just have to get through Blackwoods." Gloria persisted. Sarah and Meg had already turned their horses towards the road. "We could get hit by a car being on the road in the dark," Gloria warned. "Fine," Sarah fumed. "I'll go by the forest." Gloria urged the horse forward. As they rounded the last turn into Blackwoods, an eerie glow suddenly lit the path in front of Gloria. She urged her trembling horse forward. As she turned towards the riding stable, the glow became stronger and centered on a huge, lightning-struck oak tree. On the trunk of the tree, a woman's face appeared. She glowed with a white light as her lips moved. "Tell them," she whispered. "Tell them I'm innocent." Gloria kicked her horse, but the horse needed no urging. He flew through the woods and stopped at the stable door, trembling in fear. The next day, one of the stable owners, Tommy, stopped by while Gloria groomed her horse. Tommy had heard that Gloria had ridden through Blackwoods after dark and so close to Halloween. As she groomed her horse, Gloria worked up her courage and asked, "Tommy, why do people say we shouldn't go into Blackwoods at night?" "Because of the hanging tree," Tommy said. "The big oak." It was a statement from Gloria, not a question. "The very one," said Tommy. The apparition's words echoed in Gloria's mind. "Tell them I'm innocent." She shivered. She never rode anywhere near Blackwoods or the old hanging tree ever again. The ghost truck stopped. On his way to get married, A military man and his best man set off on an 800-mile road trip from Camp Lejeune in North Carolina to Lafayette, Indiana. It was 1 a.m. on a cold January night in 2014, and the man tells Monsters Among Us that the weather was bad and temperatures were in the negative double digits. As the pair closed in on Indianapolis, they discovered they had no money to pay for gas to refuel the car and were about to run out. Growing up in the trucking industry with my dad, I decided to stop at a truck stop, the man explained. But because the main interstates were shut down due to the weather, they had to get off the highway and search for a truck stop along the back roads instead. We found a smaller truck stop. It had one truck and it was just kind of strange. It was just a blacked out truck with a blacked out trailer. There was no real markings on it, nothing distinguishable, he says. They went in, hoping a clerk or waitress would spot them a few dollars for gas enough to make it to Indianapolis, at which time they'd go to the bank, take out cash and pay back the loan. Inside they found a tidy diner, occupied by a waitress, cook, and a lone truck driver. I went inside, talked to this driver, and he bought us a cup of coffee. We sat there and talked for about 30 minutes about what was going on and where we were headed, and he gave us $20 for gas. I went outside, pumped our gas, came back in, and I told him, "Hey, I really appreciate it. I'll be back." Making good on his word, the man got cash from the bank upon arriving in Indianapolis and returned to the diner. When we arrived at about 10 o'clock in the morning, it's boarded up, he says. It looked like it's been abandoned for years and the truck's gone. But we had just been in there. They pulled in anyway and found a police officer parked in the lot. They explained what happened just hours before, to which the cop chuckled and replied, "Oh, you met the ghost of 3. So, 2 military members converse, had a cup of coffee with, interacted with 3 people at a diner that had a fuel pump. I got $20 worth of gas," says the man. When I came back, it'd been boarded up for, if I remember correctly, the cop said it had been boarded up for the last 25 years. The Ghosts of Willoughby Coal. Built in the late 1800s, the Willoughby Coal Building in Willoughby, Ohio, housed a variety of businesses in its time, including a train depot, cheese factory, and flour mill. In 1912, it became the very prosperous Willoughby Coal, supplying coal to local residents before it was sold to Henry Windus and William Don Norris in the 1930s. Over time, the relationship between the two owners grew contentious, according to Teresa R.G. Henry Windus wanted to buy the business from Don Norris, but Don was unwilling to sell, the paranormal investigator tells Today.com. One morning, Norris allegedly told his wife he was going out for bread and to check on repairs being done on the Willoughby building. He never returned. Several hours later, his body was discovered in front of the door. He was laying in a bloody heap, RG says. Even though his death was ultimately ruled accidental, RG says that Norris' family believed he'd been murdered. Though no one knows what really happened that morning, RG believes his spirit still haunts the building. "We have come in contact with him on many occasions," she says, and claims that others have reported seeing faces in the window and heard unexplained footsteps and other unusual occurrences at the building. But Norris isn't alone. "We probably got 5 or 6 resident spirits in the building.